All right, if you have been paying attention to NBA news, then obviously you know that Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat are on the absolute worst of terms right now. I hate seeing things like this happen where we have like a player and this franchise that he did a lot for, and they made amazing runs together, and it ends up coming to this hideous end. Like we've seen that happen so many times throughout the course of NBA history. A good example of that, Shaq with the Lakers. Now, that was a much different relationship than Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. Shaq had brought that Lakers team to, I believe, what, 4 finals appearances, and they ended up winning 3 consecutive. But once they lost that 4th appearance against the Pistons, things got ugly. There were a lot of issues between Shaq and that front office, and ultimately they ended up parting ways, right? Or maybe you have those situations where a player showed some promise with the franchise and they were like on the up and up, and then it kind of ultimately crashed. Like I'm thinking right now of Ben Simmons and the Philadelphia 76ers. Simmons was amazing in his very short prime with Philadelphia, was arguably a top 3 defensive player in the league while being there, but a horrible couple of moments in that first round 2021 series, or that second round 2021 series against the Hawks. Everything was in an absolute downturn from there, and ultimately he ended up being traded away. They parted ways on hideous terms. We could think about James Harden when he was in Philly as well. There are a lot of examples of that, and this Jimmy Butler thing is starting to look like that. The Butler era in Miami was amazing. And like I said, I hate seeing it come to an end like this because I really did think that the Miami Heat still had a window to contend for something. Like if we look at them post 2023 when they made the finals and lost to the Nuggets. Last season, the biggest thing that stopped them in the postseason was health. Jimmy Butler wasn't available in that first round against the Boston Celtics, and I don't believe Terry Rozier was available as well. Those are 2 massive shot creators. And obviously, Jimmy Butler is one of the best postseason performers in the entire league. Like, you can't convince me that things would not have looked a little bit different in that first round against Boston if Miami, or if Jimmy Butler wasn't there for Miami. And I'm not saying that Boston 100% would have lost, but there was a world where Miami could have had their number. So that's where we last left off with that Heat team in 2024 in the playoffs. Was they lost in the first round primarily due to injury. So there's still a world where this Jimmy Butler and Heat thing could still work. But obviously, things are where they're at now. They didn't come to an agreement in the offseason as far as contracts go. And so now we're in the situation where Miami's going to move him to get pieces back rather than letting him walk for nothing in the offseason. And that's something that a lot of teams have done historically. If you have a big name player like that who's up for free agency, like in the coming summer, unrestricted free agency, you're going to shop him, right? And you're going to try to get some value back in exchange for him instead of just letting him go for nothing. But all in all, amazing run for Jimmy Butler, and the Heat brought them to, I think, 2 NBA finals. There was one in 2020, which was a relatively competitive series. I think that one went about 6 games, I believe, and Butler was amazing at that point in time. There are multiple conference finals appearances, so there may have been years where they didn't get to the finals, but they still made these really deep runs. What he did with the Heat was off the chain. It didn't result in a ring, right? And it never got them a championship in those post-LeBron years, but it was still so significant. And I thought they still had some juice in the tank. Like I thought a core of Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, Terry Rozier, and some of the other guys I had in that rotation, I thought a core like that could contend and make something happen. Like I really, really did. So to see things end off the way they are now is very rough. Butler's career too, and his legacy and how he'll be remembered as a player, not that he'll care at all, but for us, right, as fans, as people who enjoy the game and the storytelling aspect of it, he has had a very interesting and strange career, right? And there have been some high notes and there have been some low notes. High notes, obviously, at his best, Butler is one of the best playoff guys of the last 20 years. I've seen this dude do too many unbelievable things in the postseason over these last few seasons, right? He's clutch. You can never question his ability to show up in big moments. Maybe he'll have like these okay regular seasons, but it was a given that when Jimmy Butler got to the postseason, you were going to get unbelievable production on both ends of the floor. That's the high note, right? When it comes to Jimmy Butler's career. Low notes, never truly found a home for himself. The closest he ever got was maybe Chicago and then here in Miami. But if we look at the times in between then, there was that stint with the Timberwolves that got broken off because he just really didn't mesh well with that team. Then there was that very short stint with the Philadelphia 76ers where they could have made something happen. They had a really, really good team on paper. That was Joel Embiid. That was prime Ben Simmons. Those guys, and couldn't get over the hump. And he had his own issues with Brett Brown. We heard him talk about that before on JJ Redick's podcast some years ago. And then here we are with Miami. I thought like this would be the team he ended with. I thought that they would commit fully to, building a contender around him as the years went on. And they did. I think the Heat front office, while they do have a lot of undrafted guys and players who in other situations probably wouldn't be massive rotation pieces on a contending team, they still did a good job at bringing in certain guys around him. Like Jimmy Butler was not without great players during this Heat era. There's Hero, who's an all-star this season, in my opinion. If not, he is definitely a borderline all-star. Or I'll call him an all-star who probably won't make the game, right? Because just because you didn't make that list of, 24 guys on the all-star roster doesn't mean you didn't have an all-star level season, right? Tyler Hero is amazing. Bam Adebayo is amazing. They went and brought in Terry Rozier. He had Goran Dragic, who was amazing in 2020 when they made that finals run. Like, it's not like they didn't put a great team around Jimmy Butler, put great pieces around Jimmy Butler, right? Like, I don't think that's the case at all. Could they have done more? Sure. But I still do think that they did what they could to try to build something, and it showed that it worked, right? Like you don't make a finals appearance multiple times with a bad supporting cast, right? And a bad roster and a bad culture. So I thought that front office did well enough to ensure that this would be Jimmy's home, and they were fully committed to him, and this would be something that he could end up possibly ending his career at, right? Like that's where I thought he was with the team. And here we are right now. We can point a lot of different fingers, and I know people on social media have been talking about this. I saw the point that he obviously kind of left out in Minnesota, then left out on Philly, then left out here, obviously, with Miami. And the conversation is that's 3 teams you could have meshed with, 3 teams with great rosters. Is it about them or is it about you? That's a big conversation happening right now on social media where people are kind of collectively coming to this idea that Jimmy Butler may be a toxic player. That's what the sentiment seems to be at this particular time, right? And there are some people who think otherwise for sure, but that's how I feel a lot of people are approaching this conversation with Jimmy Butler, right? And some of that could be true. But what I find interesting is, just knowing and wondering what's next, right? Like, what's the next situation? And will there end up being more conflict, right? Because like I said, I'm not going to sit here and act like he hasn't had amazing players around him. And he's going to go get traded to a situation where he's probably on a fringe contender, where he's going to have other great players around him, right? Like, how does that thing end off, right? And how do you get much better when it comes to having a team culture or front office than Miami? Like that, you just don't have that right now across the NBA. The Miami Heat franchise is probably the best run franchise and organization in all of basketball, right? It's not, if it's not them, then it's the Spurs and maybe a few other teams, but Miami is up there for sure. So is the grass really greener right now for Jimmy Butler? That's just a question I'm posing, right? I'm not saying that he's not going to find success somewhere else, but this Heat thing, this Heat culture, it's real. Heat culture is not a fake thing. It worked. They made a lot of noise in the Eastern Conference. They were able to get these really deep playoff runs, as I talked about. Heat culture was real, and they committed to him, and they did build something great around him. So is there a situation now where Jimmy Butler will find something better than what he had here in Miami? Maybe talent-wise, but you're not going to find that culture anywhere else for real. Maybe a few teams, but you're not really going to find that a lot of other places. You're not going to find the coaching like you had in Eric Spoelstra. And I know him and Eric Spoelstra had their issues in the past, or maybe not. Like I'm thinking about that spat they had during a game, that's kind of a heat of the game thing. But you're not going to find a better coach out there than Eric Spoelstra. Like if you go end up getting traded to a fringe contender, that franchise most likely is not going to be ran any better than the Miami Heat franchise. I just really don't think so. So is the grass really greener right now for Jimmy Butler? I think that is the biggest question that I have. And so we'll see, right? We'll see what ends up happening. I still think he's going to provide value to a team, a fringe contender, a team that's trying to get over the hump and actually become a championship contender. There are a lot of people talking about Butler right now. He's 35 years old. He's injured sometimes. Like, are you still going to get value back from him? I think so. I think you're still going to get a lot from Jimmy Butler if he's out there and healthy. But for him, is there something out there that's going to be better than what you had here in Miami? Talent-wise, for sure, but we're seeing right now, especially in this league, an abundance of talent and an abundance of shot creators is not going to guarantee you a title at all. So we'll see. And also for Miami, it's going to be interesting seeing how they end up turning out after this Jimmy Butler move ends up happening. I still think they can end up being competitive because that's how good of a coach Eric Spoelstra is he can really work with what he's got at a very high level. So they're probably going to bring back some young pieces or some solid role players, or maybe like some dude who's a good enough shot creator but isn't an all-star. You're maybe going to bring that up or bring that back when you move out a player like Jimmy Butler. And I think Spoelstra can still work with that. Are they going to be a contender? No, but he can work with a lot. So we'll see what ends up happening. It's going to be an interesting next couple of weeks as we get closer to the trade deadline, but we'll see. So for Butler, biggest question, is the grass greener on the other side? And for Miami, can they end up finding consistent success and still be competitive after giving away a guy who was so impactful, especially come postseason?